Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on three. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret, and today I am talking to Jamilah Lemieux. She is a cultural critic, writer, and editor known for her sharp takes on race, gender, and parenting. She pens Slate's Care and Feeding column and is the author of the new book, Black Single Mother, a powerful collection of essays and stories about Black single motherhood. Welcome, Jamilah.
Thank you for having me.
So the subtitle of this book, Real Life Tales of Longing and Belonging. So let's start with the origins of this book and what made you start this project. And obviously you've been writing and you've been a voice for a long time. Why was this the book?
So I've been talking about writing a book for a very long time. Actually, on my old website, it said like in 2010, she's working on her first book. This is something that I've wanted to do basically my whole career. And I worked with my literary agent, Tanya McKinnon, for about 5 years before we landed on this concept. And we'd come up with something, I'd be into it, I'd work on the proposal, and I'd be like, this isn't really the book I want to write. I don't think I can write this. I don't believe in this, or I don't feel like I'm the right person for this. And there were a few times that Tanya told me to write about single motherhood or said, you should do something about single motherhood. And I didn't want to because I was afraid that if I wrote a book about single motherhood, I would be a single mother forever, that I was writing my fate. That's where it would end for me. Finally, it came up and I gave it some thought and I said, I could have really used a book like this when I was new to motherhood. I think I could have used a book like this as a young woman, considering my mother's experiences as a single mother and better understanding her. And so finally I was like, okay, this is the concept. And it took about 2.5 years to finish after we sold it.
And you talk in the introduction to the book, and you say, afraid of my personal truth, of our collective truth, of what I know to be emotionally wrenching and provocative about the stories I reveal within these pages. Talk about that fear that underlines a lot of your story and what it was to sort of confront that.
First of all, there was a lot of healing and a lot of acceptance that came to me through the process of writing this book. But going into it, even when I decided I wanted to take this on, there was fear of being honest about my own story, just being judged for being a Black single mother, period, just having to be publicly vulnerable, which I have been in my writing and, to some extent, my social media presence in a lot of ways over the years. But knowing that no part of my identity is as hotly contested or maligned as being a Black single mother. There was definitely some anxiety early on about what it would be like to publicly associate myself in this way with this kind of narrative.
Yeah, it's something that we talk about on the podcast that we've talked about with so many authors is as a mother, I think motherhood and having a child and talking about your own family is a very vulnerable place because you want to get at truths that will connect with and help other people. But we're talking about the people we're most protective of in the world, our children, our families. And there's a kind of push-pull of like the truth is what helps people, but there's such a vulnerability in putting that truth in front of people to judge.
Absolutely. I mean, on one hand, I know that telling these stories will help people, but I'm also very clear that there will be backlash. There will be people who scrutinize my choices and my identity. And I just have to be prepared for that.
You talk in the book about your relationship with your mom, who was a single mother, and tell us a little bit about your relationship with her.
Yeah, my mom, even though my father was very present in my upbringing, my mom was a single mom, and we were incredibly close growing up. I felt like my mom loved me more than other kids' moms loved them. Like that somehow we were just better in that way. She was better in that way. But I also questioned her for not having a man. I wanted siblings. I wanted us to have a car and go on vacations. And I thought, well, if I had a stepdad, things would just be so much different, so much easier for us. Why doesn't she want to be with somebody? Why doesn't she have a partner? So I looked at her strangely because of that. But my mother, I was really the center of her world in so many ways. I was her universe. I was her everything. My mother had me, she was 36, which was considered later in life back then, which is so funny thinking about that now.
I had my first at 36, and it was still considered a little later in life, but...
Yeah. But like back then, it was even more kind of like, okay, I've got older parents, and she wanted me so badly. She didn't think she could have children. So I was a surprise and a blessing. And so we've always been very close.
And then you have a relationship with your father. A close relationship. You see each other quite a bit. But then when you're, I think, 9 years old, you learn something about him. It's during the teacher strike, right? A girl who you didn't know before tells you something about your father. So tell us that story.
Yeah. I was at like a camp while the teachers were on strike. And this girl my age walks up to me and she's like, "Are you Jamilah? Your dad lives with us." And this is how I found out that my dad was in a long-term relationship with another woman and that they were, he was helping her to raise her children and they'd bought a home together in a nice part of town, that he had this whole family that I didn't know anything about. So I hadn't spent a lot of time considering who my father was outside of his relationship to, I knew about his community work. I knew about who he was to me. And I thought I knew who he was to my mother. Which I did not, but I hadn't really considered, I'd been to his apartment. I thought he still lived there. It just never would have occurred to me that he was in a serious relationship and that he was helping to raise other children. So that was very complicated and difficult for me to accept. But the way I handled it then for many years was I kind of told myself, like, well, it's great that these other children get to have a dad too. So I should just be happy about that. Like, my dad's such a good guy. Look at him helping out another family. So I tried to process it that way instead of saying, well, I wish my dad was in the house with me. Why don't I get to see my dad every day? Why don't we live together?
You say in the book, I worked to convince myself that I was at peace about my father and his other family. It wasn't him who was missing from my home, I told myself. It was the stepfather my mother should have found to replace him. And thematically, what struck me so much about the book is this theme of reckoning, which I think is the work of a lot of our lives, is reckoning with what came before, how we were formed by the people who came before, and how we're trying to kind of synthesize that information as we start raising our own children. And there was something so visceral about that moment where the other girl tells you that your father makes turkey tacos for them and that you'd never seen your father cook. So talk about that kind of reckoning about who is this person to me and to these other people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very grateful that while I was writing this book, I was also in therapy. And one of the things we talked about a lot was that revelation, like meeting this girl and finding out about my dad's other family. And I hadn't identified that as like a traumatic moment for me.
Right.
I'd always told myself it's not that big a deal. He's always been there for me. I haven't come up short in some way, but I had to reckon, the juxtaposition of also like of me doing the work in therapy to address that moment, but also watching my daughter's father raise her.
Mhm.
Like my daughter divides her time at this point evenly between her dad and I. So her dad is hands-on in ways that my father was not. She has a bedroom at his house. She knows what his pajamas look like. And I had to make peace with both the things that I would have wanted from my relationship with my dad growing up, but also recognizing that in the context of when I was born, in the circumstances under which I was born, that in a lot of ways, my dad did the best he knew how to do. He did not have an active father. Back then, even kids who spent time away from their mother's home were usually with their dad every other weekend.
Right.
And I have so many thoughts about the every other weekend. I could talk for an hour about how problematic I think.
We'll get to that
Yeah.
for sure.
I asked my mom when I was writing the book, I said, if my dad had asked to take me a couple of nights a week, would you have said yes? She was like, hell no. Immediately, just like, no. Because I think at that time, there was also this belief that children were supposed to be with their mothers 24/7, that the mom is the one who does the lion's share of the parenting. So the idea of her outsourcing that, particularly when there was another woman around, was completely unfathomable to my mom. So even had he wanted to do more, unless they'd gone to court and had a contentious battle over it, that would have been really challenging to get my mother to agree to. So in the context of who they were when they were raising me, I accept and appreciate my parents for what they did.
And then your story is that you then go on to have your daughter. So tell us about that.
My daughter's father was my first really serious boyfriend. And, we were young. We were 25 and 26. We started dating. And we have a pretty intense relationship for almost 2 years. And then we break up. And it's kind of an extended breakup. I was the first one who said, I think we should maybe see other people and just see if we find our way back to each other. And then we're dating other people, still dating each other. And then he comes to me and says, I can't do this anymore. I want to break up for good. And I'm devastated and hurt and shocked. And 2 weeks later, I find out I'm pregnant. And I thought that this was a sign from God. And I've been so responsible about birth control and condoms and Plan Bs. It didn't occur to me like, yeah, this is how pregnancy happens. But I wanted to reconcile. And, his attitude was, if that's to happen, it needs to happen organically. We're not going to do it just because we're having a baby, but I'll be an active dad and we can co-parent and we'll figure it out. And so I've been a single mother since birth, and her father has always been very present, very active. It was difficult for me at the very beginning because I wanted to get back together. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, my wanting to get back together was not about wanting him. And there was a level to which I wanted him and
Right.
had kind of fallen back in love with him in a way. But more so, I didn't want to be a single mother. I felt strongly that I was supposed to have this baby, but I thought we were supposed to be, a traditional family unit.
Right.
I think deep down all along, I kind of knew that wasn't going to happen, but I still went forward. I'm very pro-choice. I wouldn't have hesitated to have had an abortion if I felt like that was the right thing to do. But I felt like this pregnancy was intended to be carried out into the end.
And so you have your daughter.
Yes.
And right as you have your daughter, you find out a really shocking piece of news. We're going to take a break. I'm talking to Jamilah Lemieux. She is the author of Black Single Mother, and we'll be right back to hear more of this story.
Hellions, it's time for some spring cleaning, and I don't just mean the coat closets. Doing your financial spring cleaning can actually be super easy when you let Monarch do your financial spring cleaning for you. One dashboard that gets your entire financial life organized. No more clutter, no more mess, no more logins scattered everywhere, just accounts, investments, property, and more, all in one place. Get your first year of Monarch for half off, just $50 with promo code FRESH. Monarch allows you to look not only at what you've already spent, but also to plan for the future. With Monarch, you can set savings goals, plan for big purchases, and notice spending trends before they become a problem. I can generate cash flow reports that show me what we spent this quarter, this month, what we're probably going to spend next month, and feel prepared, organized, and knowing how to plan for the future. No more surprises and a lot more clarity. Try Monarch. Use code FRESH at monarch.com to get your first year half off at just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code FRESH.
Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand. And it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women, tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING. My favorite skincare products actually feel more like self-care, like they're so nice to put on and they smell so good that I'm actually happy when I get to that part of my day. And I swear that is how I feel about Osea's anti-aging body balm.
Amy, you are usually the lotions and potions queen on this podcast, but I have to say, hard agree.
Osea's anti-aging body balm is a liquid silk body balm that combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving skin smoother and firmer.
This body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel.
So we've gotten to use this product for a couple of months now, and I swear I have really noticed firmer and smoother skin, like on the back of my hands. It's like getting a mini spa treatment from head to toe.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com. So you give birth to your daughter and then you hear this part of the book. I gasped. I was like,
Yeah.
And tell us the story.
I find out right before Mother's Day. My daughter was born March 29th. And like a week before Mother's Day, I find out that her father has gotten engaged. I knew that he was seeing someone. I knew that he had a long distance situation. Somebody he met toward the very end of our time, still going back and forth with each other, that they've gotten serious. And, you know, he'd been back and forth to see her. She'd been to see him. And I find out that they're engaged.
So this sort of lands the idea that you will, in fact, be a single mother. I mean, I guess before then your relationship had ended, but it sort of closes the door on the idea that you might get back together or sort of maybe co-parent in this very specific jointed way together.
Yeah, I definitely was holding out hope until then that we would get back together. So this was like me fully accepting like I am going to be a single mother. But I think of it now as a blessing because I think that if they had not gotten married when they did, because they got married when my daughter was 4 months old, she was there. I think that had they not gotten married, then I might have held out this hope that possibly things are going to work out between us. I think that he was intentional about marrying her so that that didn't happen, either to assure her that he was done with me or to assure himself. And I'm grateful that we did not go back and forth as a couple. There was no on and off. We didn't try it and it didn't work out. There's no period of time where my daughter can say, well, I remember my parents as a couple and now they're not anymore.
Yeah, sometimes an answer is a blessing, right? Like you don't have to wonder about the question anymore. So In the sort of middle heart of the book, you wrestle a lot with the stigma around being a Black single mother. You say, social structure within our communities leaves us, Black single moms, heavily depended on and loathed at the same time. There's kind of what I would describe as an academic portion of the book where you really bring in a lot of writings and history about how Black single motherhood has become so stigmatized in our society. So tell us about this idea of, and it goes with welfare queens and all of these ideas around like the demonization of the Black single mother.
Essentially, the Black single mother has been an important part of American society since slavery. Most Black women on plantations were not married. And even if they were allowed to participate in some sort of commitment ceremony with somebody, they very well may have had children by someone else, someone that they were forced to breed with by an enslaver. Oftentimes, they were taking care of children who weren't their own, who were on the same plantation that they played a maternal role towards. We've never been credited with this labor. We haven't been widely celebrated for this work.
Quite the opposite, right?
Quite the opposite. And I think a big origin point for that is the Moynihan Report. There was the report in 1965, I believe, prepared by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a senator and also a social scientist. And he creates this report for President Nixon saying, we can give Black people affirmative action, we can give them reparations, we can give them all these things to help them along. And yes, racism has done a number on them, but nothing's going to get better for the Black community. They're not going to rise out of poverty. They're not going to have better employment rates until they address the matriarchal structure of their families. The Black woman has emasculated the Black man. She runs the community. She runs the show to everyone's detriment. And what needs to happen is that Black men need to go in military service to learn discipline, and Black women have to stop being heads of households. And there were so many people who accepted this report, including Dr. Martin Luther King, Whitney M. Young, who was the civil rights leader at the time. And at the time, I think Black women only made up 25% of heads of households with children, right? And it's a lot higher than that today. And there's just been this finger pointed at us as if it's our irresponsibility, it's our inability to be loving, that there's just all these things that are wrong with us. And this is why we're heads of households so often. But that ignores the circumstances that have made it difficult for Black men and women to enter healthy relationships with one another and to be able to take care of households together. And it also disregards the important work that Black women have done. In a lot of ways, single Black women hold the community up. Like, they're taking care of a large percentage of the children, and there are generally people who are helping. Most single mothers have somebody, whether it's their mother, their sister, their friends, their other people, generally women, playing an important role. But instead, we're seen as somehow mothering in isolation in an inappropriate way.
Yeah, and somehow also the problem at the end of all of this work. And
yeah.
I really encourage everyone to read this book. One of the things we talk a lot about on the podcast is societal structures that end up pointing the tip of the spear at individuals, women very often. So, for example, societally, we have no social safety net in the United States. And so here comes this huge system that lacks any supports. And it comes down to individual women to caretake for the elderly, to raise children, to figure out what to do when people are sick. And that it is seen as a personal failing of the person at the tip of the spear when they are not able to manage an elderly parent, a sick child, and a spouse who may not be there. And I feel like the studies in this book really made it so clear to me that concept of these systems, which, as you say, go back to slavery in the United States, are now pointed at individual women or Black women as a category and saying they're the problem. It's like, friends. They're the solution. Like
Yeah.
they're actually there doing all the work and kind of being told, this is all your fault.
Absolutely. A book that I read while I was writing this book, Doing It All, The Social Power of Single Motherhood by Ruby Russell. I interviewed her and she talked about how she's a white woman living in the UK as a single mom. And she talked about how like she and other single moms are looking to people who've mastered this for examples, and that they're looking to Black women, that they recognize how Black women have mastered single motherhood and have been effective at it. But instead, like you said, we're somehow seen as the problem.
We recently talked to Susan Sutton, who's the founder of the Ember Project that focuses on teen single moms. And it struck me this idea that single motherhood is a demonized category. And then you put a qualifier on the front of that: Black single mom, teen single mom, poor single mom. That qualifier then takes you kind of further outside of what is considered the right or the way it should be. And you capture really well in the book, what if we supported, and Susan made a very similar point, that we need to change the story from demonizing to supporting. Like these are the people actually doing the work. Why are we busy saying, you did it wrong. Everything that happens now, hands off, your problem, your fault, you figure it out. How do we start to move towards supporting Black single moms outside of this system that's telling us, write them off as the problem and move on? I mean, rather a big question. I realize if you had the full answer to that, you would be, would be in a different space.
Well, I think, I feel like the book is an answer to that. Taking the time to understand Black single mothers' experiences, to be empathetic and to recognize the opportunities for support and the necessity of supporting us as opposed to holding us out as this problem. I think that if there are people who want to see less Black single parents, and I think, just kind of considering where we are in a society, I think, first of all, I think single motherhood is only going to be a bigger and bigger conversation, particularly in the Western world, because more women are choosing it, right? More white women are choosing it. Women are deciding, I don't have to wait until I'm in a happy relationship to have a baby. Hey, I'm 35, I'm 40, I have a career, I can provide for a child, I want to be a mother. Should I wait until possibly I can't do this anymore to meet a man, or do I go on and do this on my own? I know we're going to see a lot more of that. So I think for anybody who is truly invested in reducing the number of single mothers has to consider the problem that we're collectively having with men. There are so many men in the dating pool who are not interested or ready in being partners and fathers, that are not prepared to adequately care for a woman as a human being, as opposed to, a concept or something to be used and enjoyed and discarded.
I want to dig into the topic of fathers and men. We're going to take a break. I'm talking to Jamilah Lemieux. She is the author of Black Single Mother, and we'll be right back.
You tell yourself no one wants your college-era band tees, but on Depop, people are searching for exactly what you've got. You once paid a small fortune for them at merch stands. Now, a teenager who calls them vintage will offer that same small fortune back. Sell them easily on Depop. Just snap a few photos and we'll take care of the rest. Who knew your questionable music taste would be a money-making machine? Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
From sauce to dust to nuggets. It's Taco Bell's new Diablo Dusted Crispy Chicken Nuggets. Are they mild? If they were mild, we'd have to change the name to Little Rascal Nuggets or Minor Nuisance Nuggets. Definitely Diablo. New Diablo Dusted Crispy Chicken Nuggets. A brand new classic. Only at Taco Bell. Picture being down! At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time and while supplies last.
So you wrestle with this idea very vividly in the book about the role of men in this story. And again, as we talk about and critique, or society critiques, women, single mothers, the idea that men are not part of this story seems kind of inherent to the debate. And the idea that it takes two biologically, like there is a man somewhere that was involved in producing a child, but that society kind of wants to point to the woman and forget about the man in the situation. And you talk about figuring out how to critique men and Black men in this situation while still calling them into the story. So talk about that.
There's so much that can be said critically about men and their relationship to women. You know, you can certainly say a lot about Black men and their relationship to women, but it's not my goal to point a finger at them and say, this is the real enemy, this is the actual bad guy, but instead call them in and say, we need you to be a bigger part of this process than some of you have been historically. I think Gen X is the first generation, that's the generation before mine, the first generation to have a substantial number of really hands-on dads. I don't mean just a dad that you saw at breakfast and you saw him at dinner and maybe you all went to church together on Sunday. I'm talking about a dad who's changing diapers, helping with homework, getting on the floor to play, doing childcare. That's not something that was normal for American dads for a very long time. I mentioned to my dad that I was going to a baby shower with my boyfriend the other day, and he said, oh, you know, there was a time where men didn't go to baby showers. I said, yeah, there was a time where men weren't hands-on with children. So there was no need for them to be at the baby shower. They wouldn't have been part of the celebration because they weren't going to be diapering. They weren't going to be putting on the cute little outfits. This was a life change primarily for the mother, not for the father. But I think especially parents that are no longer together, studies have shown that children that are raised in two households somewhat equitably with both parents sharing childcare and financial duties and, you know, labor, those kids have outcomes comparable to children that were raised in two-parent households. And like for so many years, the default arrangement for a divorced couple would be that the father would have the children every other weekend. And I always say, like, if you only worked every other weekend, your friends would probably say you didn't have a job. You know, if you were in a relationship with somebody and you only saw them every other weekend, you would probably complain about that or feel that you didn't have enough time together. So how is 4 days out of the month enough time to actively raise someone? And that's not to shame people for choosing that agreement, because that has been so often what was suggested as appropriate. And I think of my own mom, who would have shut down even every other weekend.
Right.
You know, like there's so many mothers who feel that like they have to be with their children 7 days a week or they're not effectively mothering. They're not effectively parenting. And that's simply not true. I think we need to shift to a place in which fathers who do not have primary physical custody of their children are allowed, and there's no reason behind that, because sometimes there's a reason mom has primary custody. But if there's no reason for that, if this person is capable and competent and willing, then he should be hands-on too. I say, dads, you need to see your kid when they wake up for school in the morning. Like, you getting them up on a Saturday and taking them to IHOP is not the same as getting them up at 6:30 on a Wednesday and getting them clothed and getting them fed and getting them out to school and making sure they do their homework and go to bed on time. You know, that's the real tough work of parenting.
You really captured this for me in a way that was like my aha moment with the book, is the idea that this book is strongly from a feminist perspective, but within that perspective, the idea is men accessing fatherhood is feminist. My father tells a story. He was an Irish immigrant from like a very men do this, women do this kind of generation. And even he was laughing at this, but the idea, he had a friend whose wife was so sick, he had to hold her up to change the diapers. That's how sick she was.
Wow.
Right? Like, and this is probably 75 years ago. But I feel like sometimes the feminist ideal is like women can do everything by themselves. But your feminist perspective of actually the more men are involved in the fabric of their children's lives, the better it is for the whole whether or not they're married or not. And I found that to be really revelatory, like allowing men to step into a role that might have threatened manhood in former generations. Like I remember when my dad saw my husband and brother-in-law wearing babies, it was like a little facial expression, like,
Yeah.
okay, he clocked it. He wasn't going to say anything about it, but I could tell that he was like, not in my day would I be wearing a baby around. But making space for men to be fathers is somehow a huge part of this story.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea, and it hasn't been something that all communities have been able to access at times, but this idea of the father being hands off was connected to the fact that he worked outside the home.
Right.
And the mom only worked inside the home. Today, most parents both of them are working. So the idea that only one working parent should be the one doing all the childcare just doesn't make sense. And it makes even less sense when those two people are not in the same home. But I often think about the number of married single mothers. I think there'll be a lot of married women who read this book and realize that, like, I have a way more equitable, livable situation than they do as a single mother.
Yeah. And that support and also that alone time, like you're right, that struck me as well, that the idea that teaching or modeling for men, the idea that involvement with their children in this very fabric way that you talk about, like seeing the pajamas and making breakfast, because the moments that happen, and I've had this conversation with my own husband, are just being present, because I could definitely remember friends of mine growing up and they had, the McDonald's awkward meal with their dad and then stayed over in a weird apartment for one night and then came back to their real lives. Talk about that in terms of your idea that 50-50 custody with parents is far superior to every other weekend.
There's a book I love called The 50-50 Solution, the surprisingly simple choice that makes moms, dads, and kids happier and healthier after a split, by Emma Johnson. I cite her in the book, and I already felt good about what we were doing and the few other families that I've known that have had a similar situation. I've seen how well it worked, but when I read this book, and she's like, yeah, the data shows that, like, this is the best path for kids whose parents are not together if both parents are capable of doing this. I want to see more families take this on. And I think that, again, for mothers, it's letting go of this idea that I have to be the only parent. I have to be the main parent. When my daughter was little, she spent 2 days a week with her dad and 5 days a week with me. And over time, 2 became 3 quite often. If I had to travel for work or if I had a speaking engagement, it could be 3, it could be 4. And we relocated, both households relocated from New York to California about 6.5 years ago. And when we were preparing to do that, her dad said to me, hey, could we just do a 50-50 thing? And we've never been to court. There's never been any mediation or anything like that. We've always worked things out between us. And I had been scared of that for years. I was always afraid that he would ask for 50-50. At one point, I was receiving child support and I was afraid of losing that. But the bigger thing was I thought it would make me less of a mom. And my own mom, she did not understand that at all. She called me a weekend mom once. Because there was a time where, because originally our 50-50 was 3 days with him, 4 days with me. And there was a time where my daughter and I were having some challenges with getting her out of the door for school on time. It was going to be a big thing. And she didn't have that issue with her dad. They could always get her out the door. And so her dad says, what if she did 4 days with me and 3 days with you? So there was a period of time where he was on a weekly basis having more time with her than I was. And I remember I told my mom, I was like, well, I have her 3 days of the week. And my mom was like, what are they, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? And I wanted to say, no, I would never pick Friday and Saturday and Sunday as my days because I have a life of my own,
Right.
But she's adjusted and, we have a great thing that works. My daughter tends to, if there's somebody she wants to pick an extra day with, it's usually me. But we kind of alternate 3 days here, 4 days there. Also, my daughter moves around, which most people with joint custody that I've talked to don't quite have the same. Like there's a mother I interview in the book, and they did it 1 week with one parent, 1 week with the other parent. We do Sunday, Monday, Thursday with me every week, and generally 3 days with her dad every week. And then we alternate that fourth day, which right now is Tuesdays. But it works. And I've asked my daughter, would you rather have consecutive days? Would you rather, spend half the week here and half the week there? And she's like, no, because I don't really miss either of you all very much because I'm constantly seeing you.
Yeah. To me, the takeaway for every mom listening to this podcast with this book, whether or not you are a Black single mom yourself, is that you, Jamilah, reckon with society, your family, every story that has come before. And that process of reckoning leads you in the book to say, what do I want my life and my family to look like? And making that happen throughout the story of the book, in spite of all of the voices around you, is a lesson for every woman. So I really cannot recommend this book more highly. It is Jamilah Lemieux's Black Single Mother. Jamilah, tell everyone, it's 2026. People know how to buy a book, basically, but tell them where to find the book, where they can find more of your writing and more about you.
The book is available where books are sold, all the major retailers that I don't want to shout out, but I also kind of want you to leave me a review on one of those major retailers' websites. You know which
That's
one.
the trick. You buy it on Bookshop and you leave a review on the major ones.
Yes. You can buy it from a number of sellers on bookshop.org.
We will have a link right in the show notes where you can buy it.
Thank you. There's a number of indie booksellers that have it available, including a few that are on bookshop.org. My website is JamilahLemieux.com. I do not update it as much as I should, but I'm going to work on that. I'm active on Threads and Instagram at Jamilah Lemieux, and I am on book tour. So far, I've got stops in New York, Philadelphia, Miami, Atlanta, and we're going to be doing Chicago and DC for sure, too, and hopefully some other places.
And those dates are available on your website?
I will get the dates on my website, but they're if you Google Jamilah Lemieux book tour dates, it's on the Penguin Random House page for my book as well. But I do have all my book tour dates posted on my social media, on my Instagram.
Perfect. Jamilah, thank you for this book, and thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
This Mother's Day, celebrate the woman who's been there through it all with Pandora Jewelry. Choose jewelry that reflects the love you share and the moments that matter most. Make it even more meaningful with engraving, a name, a date, or a message just for her. Because the best Mother's Day gift says more than I love you. It says, I see you. Find the perfect Mother's Day gift at your local Pandora store or tap the banner.